You are now tuned into Flipping the Birds, a Philly Sports Network podcast.
What's going on, Eagles fans? Welcome one, welcome all to another episode of Flipping the Birds.
He's into the end zone. Touchdown, Eagles.
What's going on, guys? Welcome to Flipping the Birds. Off a brief hiatus from last week, but back. It's the Morgan and Eric show, the M&E show this week. Brian, is with the in-laws. We wish him the best. I'm sure he's having a great time. And Zach's not with us either tonight, so it's gonna be a bit unhinged, maybe, Eric. I don't know. How are you feeling?
I could be unhinged if that's the aim here. I mean, I could also be hinged. I'll be, you know what? Let's just call it a nice 50-50 and see where it goes.
It just feels, I don't know what it is, but it just feels when like Brian's not here, and especially when Zach's not here to like also kind of bring a voice of reason. Like it just feels like the parents are gone. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
The party started a little bit.
I hear you. I definitely hear you on that.
Yeah.
No, it's I think we're gonna do the parents proud. I would guess in this kind of comparison. So yeah. Hopefully we don't destroy the house too much.
Yeah. I mean, last week we kind of tackled. I guess 2 weeks ago we kind of tackled some off-season drama. We've been drama free at least a little bit for the most part, anyways. For the last 2 weeks. So that allows us to kind of dive into what the Eagles are actually going to look like football wise. I mean, it's rare that we get to talk actual football in the off season, which is fantastic. But we're going to start with talking about kind of the defense, give a little kind of preview about what we're thinking and what we're looking forward to for this season. Obviously we've kind of talked about the initial move of hiring Vic Fangio and what that's going to mean, but diving into it a bit more today. Overall, I think that there's an opportunity, kind of across the board in a lot of different positions, but maybe position wise, are there any positions that you feel are really going to benefit from kind of the move? Like, where do you see the biggest kind of uptick from the production last year being?
To me, it's the uptick has to be the secondary because it's the most responsible part of a Fangio scheme. And I think because, and I put a lot, and I know I've put a lot of weight into this almost certain part of it, but I think because Fangio's running it and it's his scheme and he knows how to coach, obviously his scheme the best, that you're not going to kind of see a ragtag like attempt of it. You're going to see better execution of it. So that in all, compared to last year and what is supposed to happen, I do think that you're going to see a better execution in the secondary is just, going to be a head and shoulders better than what we saw a season ago.
Yeah, I would agree. I think one of it's just going to be personnel, right? They obviously loaded the secondary with some young talent, but also brought back, a stalwart kind of fiery competitor in Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. I think that's going to be pretty massive. But talking about that secondary, kind of going into it a little bit. Well, I guess it kind of works, especially with Vic Fangio's defense, to kind of work top down, right? And that's kind of where you start. But talking about those safeties, that's going to be, I think, probably the biggest difference here, right? Is like, again, we're going kind of from a scheme that mimicked Vic Fangio, but now we get the real thing. One of the biggest things about that secondary is disguising coverages. And the Eagles have gone out and gotten some pretty versatile, pretty athletic safeties that they've added to the mix. A couple that were already in-house. Reed Blankenship, I think, is perennially underrated. He's going to continue to be underrated, but I think he's a fantastic player. Where do you see these guys fitting into the scheme? Like, who do you feel are going to be the top two guys? Do you think there's going to be a rotation? How do you think it's going to kind of all simmer out?
I do think that there will be a rotation in some aspects, just because there is a flexibility in the defense as far as going back to the secondary, and that we'll see the rotation amongst things as far as you know, at this point, edge rushing, like, so I guess it would be the linebacking group.
Right.
You're going to see a rotation on the defensive line. You kind of have limited depth, or you have, depth that's going to work hugely in your favor for some people who are playing for another opportunity next season. You go down to and like, for example, you go down to the defensive line, or you go down to the rushing linebackers, and you look at a guy who's playing for an audition for to stay in Philadelphia or to cash out somewhere else. So, Josh Sweat is somebody that's a huge example there. You look at your, flexibility in the secondary, and you got young guys. You got Cooper. You can be a safety, play corner. You got guys like, still got Avonte Maddox. Like, he's fighting for a spot in his team. Somebody who was let go, he was brought back. There's probably another idea or a new design or new avenue to have a role on this team. And quite frankly, if Bradbury is somebody who wants to stick around this team, he's going to have to find some flexibility and figure it out. What that is, who knows? And if that's even an option, who knows? But yeah, the flexibility and the competition, as far as just at training camps and then how that will carry out into the season, is something that I look at as a huge factor for this defense.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned some of the guys that, were kind of almost a given last year, all of a sudden, almost on the chopping block. One, it's an indication of how quick things move in the NFL, but I think also just an indication of how much talent the Eagles have added to this team that last year for a long part of the season was, a Super Bowl favorite. So, as much as the scheme is going to affect things, like it's really hard to get it wrong with this level of talent. I think there's obviously some key positions where you'd like to see a bit of improvement. One of those being linebacker, obviously, but kind of staying in the secondary. Talking about Cooper DeJean and his versatility, one of the guys you mentioned who's very similar, maybe not with the same kind of top end, but Avonte Maddox, right? Can play in the slot, has experience with safety. You kind of get a lot of those players on this defense. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, again, was one of those players that had a lot of slot experience, especially when he was with the Saints, moved around quite a bit. So you have, almost 4 or 5 deep at the safety position, where like Reed Blankenship, I don't know that he's going to play a lot of slot corner, but I wouldn't put it past him to be able to do it. So you have, 4 or 5 guys deep that can play both the slot corner position and safety position. Like there's going to be a lot of movement in the secondary. I think also one of the guys we're kind of, overlooking in that regard is also like kind of mentioned before is Avonte Maddox. I think that his ability to play those both positions, like he's kind of been overlooked this offseason, but they brought him back for a reason. Unfortunately, hasn't been able to stay healthy over the last couple of seasons. But when he is healthy, man, he's probably one of the better slot corners in the league. And so I think overall that the kind of middle of that secondary is in a really good position. But I'm curious to hear your take on the outside and talk about those corners. Obviously, Darius Slay going to be, not even penciled in. He's going to be penned in, right, as the starter. It's going to be kind of hard to unseat him. But who do you see as your favorite kind of to play opposite him for that second corner position?
To me, it's Quinyon Mitchell. I know, drafted, put him right in, plug and play sort of scenario that I'm creating here, but I think that's how it goes. And, if not, then there's an opportunity for maybe Isaiah Rodgers to get in there. That's fine. I think we saw that Isaiah is not going to be playing slot or nickel as far as that kind of corner. So that basically says I'm playing outside. If that means opposite of Slay and not back up to Mitchell, maybe to begin the season, then that's cool. But it's one of those situations that we'll come back to this when we talk about more positions, across the team. But there's some positions where I can see a veteran for what it's worth starting, and then maybe a rookie taking over maybe later in the season. This could be a scenario, but I do think that there is an opportunity for Rodgers to start opposite of Mitchell, but in my opinion, Mitchell probably is the favorite to do so.
Yeah. I think those two are the same. It's the same for me. I think Isaiah Rodgers, just with the veteran experience, probably gets the kind of the benefit of the doubt there. Quinyon Mitchell, like he's going to start eventually. I think that probably by next year, depending on how they deal with the Slay contract, he may be taking over for that position. So I think regardless of who's playing, Quinyon Mitchell needs to get some starting experience this year. The other guy we haven't mentioned yet is Kelly Ringo, and I think that he's by all accounts really developing well. I'm not sure where he fits in, but I think he's one of those guys that definitely deserves a shot at playing time. I'm not sure if where that's going to be. It's kind of an issue of there's almost too many mouths to feed. But I think he's another guy, I don't know where he's going to play, but he also seems to deserve some starting time. There's a lot of those young guys, right? And we're, 4 or 5 guys that, played at some point or even started at some point last year that may be now on the chopping block, which is crazy to think. But no matter who kind of starts opposite Darius Slay, it seems to be the Eagles are in a much better position than last year. Now, I think the thing is that this defense, right, at the corner position, fairly standard in what they ask. They do a lot more movement with the safeties, but we'll ask those players to play more deep zone in the corners. They'll go to that cover 4 look a bit more. So it'll be interesting to see too. I don't know. It's Quinyon Mitchell, a lot of man, in his time in college and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see how he deals with that because it really is an adjustment for the eyes. Not saying he can't do it. He's probably pretty good at it already, but maybe that's where that veteran experience for Isaiah Rodgers comes in. One of the benefits about Isaiah Rodgers is really good against the run. He'll come up and play against the run quite well. So that might also kind of give him an advantage. But I think that's probably one of the tightest position battles we'll see on the defense. But kind of going into the next position is linebacker. And I'm curious. That one's
well. Before we dive in, where do you see Eli Ricks in the mix?
Well, and that's an interesting question too. I think that you'll probably see a lot more diamond nickel in general. So whether that's kind of a slot corner, if they go to that look, maybe one of those guys can play as your dime or nickel backer, right? Almost playing in the box. I'm not too many mouths to feed, right? I mean, you talk about him, you talk about a guy like Josh Jobe that wasn't that far off a couple of years ago and got some opportunities last year. All these guys are going to be great special teamers, which is fantastic. But it'd be interesting to see where they slot in because I think Eli Ricks, in his time playing last year, definitely showed that he deserves some playing time. I don't know. Do you feel that he's going to take over for any of these veterans?
I mean, I don't think that he is out of the question of being on the roster if you're ready to get rid of Bradbury. Depends what your stance is on that, really. That's kind of how I look at it. Because to me, as far as the corners and how I would use them, and if there was of course, money changes things a little bit, but Bradbury's not in my top 4. I don't know if he's in anybody's top 4, but to me, it's going to be Rodgers. I mean, in no particular order, it's going to be Rodgers, it's going to be Slay, it's going to be Mitchell, Ricks, probably Ringo, and then or Maddox. Depending, Maddox again still fighting for a spot on the roster, so it might not be like Marina was saying. Ricks is gone unless they keep 8 corners. It might not be. It might be in fact that Bradbury and Maddox are gone.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, it's really interesting, right? Because on one hand, Avonte Maddox easily right now penciled in as a starter, right?
And McPherson, is kind of a foregone on that too.
Yeah, exactly. I think McPherson has the upper the coaching staff really seems to like him. I know he's a really good special teamer. Avonte Maddox, I think is the really big question mark. We were just talking about him kind of being a starter that could be a contributor and the same time could easily be cut, right? If Cooper DeJean, I think that's where Cooper DeJean slots in best. If they're going to use him, is that kind of that slot corner and then playing the safety when they go to that too high look. And on one hand, Avonte Maddox could easily be a starter and be locked in, and on the other hand, he could be off the roster by the time the season starts. So it's really interesting. The contract he got isn't that expensive, so the Eagles could just kind of cut their losses. And he's a guy that I think would easily get kind of swept up by another team. So a big kind of question mark surrounding him. But I mean, we mentioned all these young guys that I think based on the direction the Eagles are going, they're gonna give those guys playing time if they're capable. So some interesting kind of question marks in the secondary.
Yeah, it's just nice that, but again, you have options, and it's not necessarily the worst options either. Like, I know this depth is, something that you can just in a sense, it's not necessarily the depth is bad, but the depth's not anything that's, the right home about. However, a couple seasons ago, it was worse than this.
Right.
So,
sure.
this is an absolute improvement. I don't know. It's a good trend. I like the direction it's going. And then, obviously in training camps, preseasons, whatever it has you in a regular season, some of this pressure is going to create diamonds. Like, Absolutely. You're going to see the safety, and it's going to be like, you can have Cooper DeJean wherever you want, but if you even break away from the corners and you look at safety, like Gardner-Johnson, maybe DeJean, and then you got, maybe behind Gardner-Johnson, Blankenship, and then Brown, Brown behind maybe DeJean. Like, those are four there that I would say those are probably going to be the safeties that make up your team.
Yeah. I think safety might be one of the deepest positions. Obviously, the top end, maybe not as talented as some other teams in the league. I think that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, obviously, as mixed reviews across the league, but definitely depth there, right? Like that's not going to be an issue. I think another thing that troubled the Eagles in the past is, little injuries turn into massive problems because there's no depth, and that shouldn't be an issue. But kind of turning our eyes closer to the line of scrimmage. One of the biggest question marks on this team that was or wasn't answered, depending on how you look at it, is the linebacker position. Apparently Zach Bond's going to come in and be the savior of this linebacker group. But for those of us that aren't convinced, like, how do you see this linebacking group shaping up, understanding that they did add Devin White, and they're hoping that he can be a contributor right away. Again, there's mixed reviews on his ability to contribute. We haven't seen what we want out of Nakobe Dean. We're not really sure how Nolan Smith's going to fit in. He seems to be more of an end than an off-ball guy. And then, obviously drafted, the legend's son in Jeremiah Trotter Jr., but he might be a year or two off before he's able to contribute. So how do you feel about the linebacker group? How do you feel like that's going to shake out?
I've been harsh on them, obviously, regarding my takes on Nakobe Dean. But what I will say is, on paper, they don't look like the linebacking group that's right for Fangio defense. Mostly because I see a linebacking group that complements stopping the run and rushing the quarterback. I don't see a linebacking group that complements pass coverage. So that's really where I'm getting at. So, the dumb answer that I want to give is which ones will stand out, the ones that can play pass coverage.
Right.
That's, pretty much it, which, hey, this could be the season that all of a sudden Nakobe Dean, does show me up and, does shut me up and say, hey, I can do that. And, if he can, great, fantastic. I'll eat my crow. But at the same time, to expect that when I haven't seen, I don't know, we haven't seen 10 games from him in the NFL.
Right.
So to me, it's kind of like, I'm making a blind leap of faith over here on that matter. Do I think that Devin White's going to be, somebody that's going to be capable of doing that? To an extent, sure, but a reliable linebacker that I expect that to be his bread and butter throughout the season, no. So it's, as far as good linebacking play is concerned, I think that's still going to be the weak point of the defense, but I think that's also still the project of the defense.
Yeah,
you're still going to be figuring it out for not just this year, but for maybe the next 2 years still. So that's what's going on there. But yeah, as far as the linebacking group, average at best, I think is what we're going to see. We're not going to see like a Nate Gary, so we don't have to worry about that, sure. But we're gonna. I don't think so. I really don't think so. I really don't think it's going to be that bad.
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
But I just don't think that we're gonna, see something just because Jeremiah Trotter is on the team. We're not gonna see like his dad in the heyday linebackers out there either.
Yeah, for sure. Like
No.
I think overall, you're hitting the nail on the head. We not as much of an improvement. I think you see a splash signing like Devin White, and you hope the linebacker woes are solved. But in reality, they got marginally better. I think they added some depth, and for the future, you hope Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Develops into the guy that we hope he is, wearing midnight green. But I think the hope realistically for me is that the one thing that the Vic Fangio defense does is it doesn't bring a lot of pressure, but it loves to simulate pressure, right? Kind of famously, moved to putting a lot of guys up on the line against the Rams when Sean McVay was on his tear, and he loves to move them around and just kind of confuse defenses. And I hope that with that, and if the one thing that the linebacker group for the Eagles has going for it is athleticism, right? And so by moving them around, by putting them in different positions and allowing them to kind of flow to things and kind of disguise stuff and make the quarterback kind of second guess, I hope that is kind of buys them time to make those mistakes. I think the thing we haven't seen from Nakobe Dean, which we hope is the mental processing, right? Like this was something at Georgia that seemed to be one of his strengths. He seemed to kind of diagnose well, flow to the football well, and then we just didn't see that at the next level yet. Again, like you said, hasn't been on the field as much as we'd hope, but
Right.
Made a lot of mental mistakes, wasn't necessarily in the right position as much, and was kind of relying on his athleticism, which could have been the case at Georgia. You never know what's going on behind the scenes. Maybe his athleticism was kind of compensating that. But again, all indications pointed to him kind of being able to make that leap to the next level. We just haven't seen it. So I'm hoping maybe, creating that chaos up front and just disguising stuff, making the quarterback second guess, he can kind of get back to reading stuff, and maybe that makes his reads a little simpler. Again, he's still got ground to cover, but he's an athlete, right? That's the one thing he's got going for him. He's definitely a good athlete. Same thing for Devin White, right? Has an issue with kind of, his flow to the football in the run game and maybe taking the wrong gaps, doesn't necessarily get off blocks, but a lot of that can be kind of helped by, again, confusing the O-line, making it difficult for them to figure out who they have in their blocking protection and the run scheme. So I hope that can kind of compensate for it, but I think that the main issue, and we talked about this last year a ton, is just tackling, right? You need these guys to tackle. And that they haven't really gotten much better in that aspect.
Yeah, now and when you bring up tackling and the whole conversation talking about like a pass first linebacking or a coverage first linebacking sort of style, I think about how can safeties, right? And you mentioned this a little bit earlier, how can safeties be used to kind of compensate as a linebacker inside the box? What screams out to me is Blankenship. I think to me, Blankenship, that's his role in this defense. I don't think he's a starting safety, but I think if he's going to be deployed in this defense, it's going to be in that look. Also, a name that I'm looking out for all year is Bond. Like that's going to be a linebacker. I don't know what to make of him because I don't know a lot of film on him, but a lot of people have been talking highly of him. So let's see it. Like I'm wide open to what the linebacking can be on this team.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Like I think it's Bond is the kind of the good segue into talking about the defensive line, because by all accounts leading up to his time with Philly, was a much better pass rusher than anything else, right? And that's kind of what he did. That's the one thing this Fangio defense does, is it uses ends that are decent in coverage, right? And, not necessarily a strength of the starters, at least on the Eagles defense, but part of disguising blitzes means your ends are dropping in coverage, right? And so if he's able to do that and kind of show blitz and drop off, and maybe that's where you get that, oh, he's looking pretty good, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean he's playing good linebacker. That just means he's doing well in the scheme. And so as much as that is a good indication, sometimes when when the bullets are flying, when you're in game, all of a sudden you realize, oh, he's really not an off-ball linebacker, right? So I'm hoping for the best, but a good kind of segue, because the Eagles will definitely need to create some kind of pass rush. And, I mean, we can get to the interior maybe next, but let's talk about kind of that end position. And, you already kind of mentioned Josh Sweat. I mentioned Nolan Smith before. Brandon Graham's still in house. But, definitely not necessarily the edge group that, maybe we are used to. Like, there's not the same depth than the rotation that we're used to. Again, that's dependent entirely on how Nolan Smith develops, but they bring in Bryce Huff to kind of contribute to that. Could be a fantastic addition, very athletic. Reminds me in a lot of ways of Brandon Graham. Do you think that kind of answers the gap left by Hassan Reddick? How do you think that fits in this defense? Do you think they've done enough to kind of supplement the pass rush that at times was kind of the thorn in their side?
In comparison with context, yes, because I think that Huff can be the replacement, like a good enough replacement for Reddick. But again, in this scheme, that's going to come down to less of a blitz, kind of style to get these sacks and the pressure on a quarterback, and it's going to come back to a lot more of coverage sacks. So it's how good is the secondary, how much how will the linebackers help you out against tight ends running trying to bail out quarterbacks and whatnot. But no, I like Huff a lot in this situation where I can see him kind of filling that void. And in comparison with the context that I kind of alluded to earlier, the void is that the Eagles have already kind of won this transaction, because I don't really understand what Reddick's doing with the Jets, or really not doing with the Jets right now.
Mm-hmm.
So in context and in comparison, and what do I think going into this season? I think, that the Eagles and Huff might be a better match in hindsight. And we never wanted to see it, obviously, when it was going down between Philadelphia and Hassan Reddick. Perhaps he was, if he was chasing sacks last year, if that's, if that's the narrative and if that's what it was, then, you kind of really weren't running the scheme as designed, and that's that. But at the same time, if you're willing to break away from the scheme, then you're not playing the game the right way, and that already tells me that I want somebody who would play it the right way, and that leaves everything on the table, knowing how good Hassan Reddick was for Philadelphia. So you do just kind of want the guy that's going to play the game the right way, and if that's going to mean that here's Huff, who might not have the output that Reddick had, in his first season in, I'm still comfortable with him. And I'm comfortable with him because he does have Graham to still learn from, and he's on his way out. And, he's going to have that pressure from Sweat, because Sweat's playing for a contract year. So if you believe in the locker room kind of pushing one another, then we might be in a situation where the pass rush is still, very, very disruptive in the defense, where it's not really meant to be the emphasis.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting because you kind of look at this defense, and obviously, it reminds me in a lot of ways, and I know that this will be kind of an obscure reference for a lot of people, but it reminds me of a Canadian defense, because a lot of times your field end, right, your strong side end, is asked to do a lot more in coverage, is asked to drop out more, is asked to move around a lot. In this kind of pseudo 3-4, where they're going to have 3 down linemen, and what they assume is kind of like an off-ball linebacker, but it's not, right? It's gonna masquerade a lot as a 4-3. They're gonna have 5 linemen at the line. Sometimes they're gonna move around. The most important part is that those 3 interior guys are true hand in the dirt linemen, which they're very talented in. But you talk about that kind of defense, and you talk about that field end, that strong side end. Whether it's, an outside linebacker and end, whatever you call it. But Hassan Reddick would have been perfect, right? Absolutely perfect. And you lose that guy in Bryce Huff, you bring him in, and at the time kind of assume that he's going to kind of take over that pass rushing role. And now, is going to be asked to do more. Nolan Smith was a guy who you brought in to kind of overtake that Hassan Reddick role. So I'm curious to see how much more he's given on his plate this year, because I think that he fits that role perfectly. Whether or not he's ready for it, on paper, he fits that role better than Bryce Huff. And obviously, you brought Bryce Huff in for a reason. Rush the passer, relentless effort, all that stuff. He's going to play, and he's going to play a lot. So where do you find the space for Nolan Smith? How's he going to fit in? Are you going to use him off ball? There's a lot of questions like surrounding Nolan Smith, but kind of a great opportunity for him now, because this defense fits his skill set almost to a T, where he's able to move around. Obviously, more of a run stopper than a pass rush guy, but is developing those skills. But how do you feel about his development? Where do you see him fitting in this defense?
I'm sorry, one more time.
For Nolan Smith.
Went in and out, yeah. So as far as Nolan Smith on the defense, he's built for the pass rushing role as well. Like I really think it's interchangeable. You talk about moving on the defensive line and seeing a bunch of different looks. You're gonna have guys who can rush from both sides, weak side and I guess strong side, if you will. And you're gonna have exactly as you said, that pseudo kind of 3-4, 4-3, where a linebacker is going to play on ball, but it's going to be a rusher. You're going to have those sort of situations. I think Nolan Smith and I think Huff kind of share the same sort of, in my mind, the same sort of role. It's just, coming from what end. And, that's to me. Yeah, I mean, I don't see. I might be naive to Fangio's defense and how he usually runs his line, but I don't see much of a different role between the two. That's kind of how I perceive it. Now, in terms of kind of getting a rush on the quarterback, I mean, you're going to see probably more of a work from the interior. And forcing quarterbacks out of the pocket that way. And that's where your linebackers might eat. So it might be easier for, not to exactly have a rush, but just work the pocket outside and then, just kind of, force the offense. And I think that's what you're going to, what the difference is going to be in my mind when I think of a coverage first kind of pressure versus a blitz kind of pressure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, again, kind of perfect segue. You talk about that interior defensive line, and I can't think of many years that the Eagles have been in a better position, right? Like, obviously, losing Fletcher Cox hurts, but you talk about young talent, and you talk about, just raw ability. You got Jordan Davis, who looks like he's in the best shape of his life. You got Milton Williams, who we've talked about, probably – one of the players that I'm most excited for. But then you also have Jalen Carter, who, is coming off, what should have been, maybe even defensive MVP, Puka Nacua, pretty talented too. And CJ Stroud as well. But, these three guys, all of which, are young and developing players. Eagles are in a really good position in the interior defensive line. How do you feel about that group?
Yeah, I'm really, I think Jordan Davis is getting a little bit too much guff. I think he'll be fine. I don't think there's too much to worry about there. But I want to talk about depth before we talk about, because I think we've, given to Milton Williams flowers. We all know what we really think about Milton Williams. We think he's going to be potentially break out this season. Mm-hmm. Moro Ojomo, that's somebody that I have an eye on to see how he develops, how kind of he's taken in by the team, because, all these good playoff teams, which I have this team being a 14-3, at the end of the season, ideally, all these good playoff teams, they have a locker room where it's just pure vibes. And I want to see how the defensive line and everything else like that kind of leads that locker room, because that's where we've seen it before, like a Fletcher Cox,
right?
Kind of situation. So I want to see how that keeps going. But I think Milton Williams, we've already discussed. The one that stands out to me as, the one that I want to see to be the most disruptive this year is Jalen Carter. Like Jalen Carter, dude, if he can rip, right off the line and just be back there and do his dang, wherever he wants to.
Yeah.
This defensive line can be nuts, and there could be, finally some sort of a semblance of really good depth as far as the interior line. Like you're sitting there and talking about guys all the way back to you got Marlon Tuipulotu. God, I actually nailed that.
Zach's favorite.
Yeah, and you got to look. I don't think Gabe Hall's worth being looked over. Like that was he's a rookie. I think there's something to be said here that Philadelphia has always pretty much had decent pass rushers.
Right.
I don't know, man. I'm excited. I'm just excited about the depth here and what could be of it. But I think we can talk about on the field and the starters, and we have a pretty good idea because to me, we've seen these guys for at least 2 to 3 years now, so we're only expecting them to improve. But to me, off the field matters all the same with somebody like Fletcher Cox retiring. So I want to see how the locker room kind of bounces back from that. Offensive line can be said the same, but we're not talking about the offense today. But I think the offensive line, now you got more guys who, you got veterans still, you got, you got guys who have been committed more money. You want to see how that goes as far as the offensive line, but I think that's more stable than the defense. So that's why, you look to the defense and how that can go.
Yeah.
It begins in the locker room for me this year. That's where it goes. And honestly, that might have been the downfall of a part of last year. I think it's hard to not overplay that, especially when you did hear, whether it was right or wrong, some reports, some rumors about Hassan Reddick.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
I mean, it's an underrated kind of aspect that we haven't really talked about that much, but maybe we can kind of touch on it a little bit here. But realistically, the only kind of returning true veteran is Slay on the outside. And so not only a real opportunity for this defense to reset with a new coordinator, but able to reset within that locker room. And so I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of us are so hopeful is that there's kind of it felt like it was needed at some points with the defense. And at the same time, we kind of, because of the way the season ended last year, had a kind of a damper on how well the defense performed, and definitely towards the end of it, we're performing worse. But there were a lot of spectacular games. The Miami one stands out in particular, where at the time Miami was, blowing teams out, had the best offense in the league, and the Eagles shut them down pretty handily. So, obviously, some of that talent left, but a lot of it's still in the building, but young and developing. And then they got an opportunity now to kind of reset and, infuse some life into this defense that, by all accounts and for every good reason you can think of, should be fairly dominant again. They have some things to figure out, but it's interesting. The thing that you talk about is that locker room chemistry and, a chance to reset there because, this, we've talked about it in the past, but this defense needs some teeth. They got some dogs on there, but they're kind of, right now they're barking sometimes, but they're not really, growling. They're not really starting. They're not really baring their teeth, and they need to do that again. And I think that's why some of us are so excited because, the young guys on this team are some of the, more dominant players on this team as well. You talk about guys like Quinyon mentioned, like you turn on that film, that's a dog at corner, right? You get excited about that. He's physical. You talk about, Devin White, right? Like, he makes some mistakes, but he's a physical player too. Like he can be when he needs to be. We talked about Milton Williams, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, all physical, imposing players. And so you're hoping that kind of reset in the locker room allows these guys to, bring the dog out and kind of make a statement.
Yeah, and you kind of, you're bringing up some of these veteran guys that are taking sort of a back seat. Like this is sort of the first year, as you were saying, that these young guys can actually eat. These young, hungry players that we had on this team can actually eat. Like, Cox retired. Well, Cox retired, so somebody else can go. Because get their money, get their bag.
Also, Brandon Graham is a fair point.
Right, yeah, all really the same thing with Brandon Graham. Like, he's taking the back seat. Obviously Bradbury, he's by default.
Taking a
That's
back seat. Yeah.
You know, so the only thing that really no one has taken a back seat is a linebacking group, because there's really no one there, because not necessarily saying that you did that led the team, or there wasn't really a bona fide leading linebacker that we've had on the team from last year. So for what we have as a new linebacking group, or a mostly new linebacking group, it kind of just is what it is there, and we'll see. Basically, is the message for the linebackers. But everything else, yeah, let's see something out of this young group this season. And if it means that the team is dominant and we're starting to see that midway through the season, then you have every reason in the world to be excited. You have every reason in the world to be as excited as a Philadelphia Flyers fan with Matvei Mishkov. I'll put it that way. If this defense starts churning the way that I'm talking to, young with the veterans who are leading the way as mentors, now we're talking.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a great note to end off on. For those of you guys that stuck around, appreciate you being with us next week or the week after. Hope to have the full cast. At least Brian back, and diving into the offense and talking about the changes there. Obviously, heard Sirianni starting to put a lot of, relinquish a lot of the responsibilities on offense. So we'll talk about that. But in the meantime, hope you have a good rest of your week. And this has been Morgan Burkett and Eric Reese, and go Birds.
Go Birds.
Yes, sir. No, wait, I should have had it queued up.
You got to hit the button. You got to tell these people to leave. Flip.